See, that's what sleep deprivation does.
Well, I had a question and
Sure.
and for the group, maybe this is a thought, you guys are probably already thinking about it anyway, but would it make sense to have Justin put together a sequence of the phases perhaps? I don't know. I mean, and take these, one bite at a time.
Sure.
Listen to his opinion on this far more than anybody else's, obviously being the trained eye that sees this type of thing. I would
We can-
definitely be on your guidance on this.
We can definitely try to phase it. The only thing I'd caution council about is a lot of times with a project like this, if you have someone in there doing your dirt work, your street work, he's gonna have this up to do this sidewalk too. It's gonna be more efficient to do it all at once when everything's disturbed. They kind of have their own area to work. Where if we go through and we put the street curb and gutter infrastructure in, we're gonna have some disturbance outside of the right of way. Gonna go through there, reseed that. Don't really want to come back a year later, take all that new seeding out to get our sidewalk in, have that other disruption. With increased prices too, I'll say that, it's always hard to try to get the money to do it right away.
Mm.
But I think it's one of those efficiency things where we can look at just getting everything together. What I can do is, get some cost estimates put together on what that full street breakout kind of looks like, high level cost. And then we can really look at sidewalk costs versus curb and gutter, versus street, versus storm sewer. And that would probably help facilitate some of the conversation too. And then, really, John's talking about some of the assessments. We can start looking at that and breaking down and so, on one of those three different scenarios, whatever we go, that way we know the fiscal impacts as well.
I think it's critical to have that information by public hearing.
Definitely. Because it's an education process for all of us and everybody needs to understand what the process is. Wouldn't you agree?
Because, yeah, the phasing thing, like Justin said, I mean, you're probably talking a 30% difference in cost by phasing it to increase between one year to the next with the subs and people molding and stuff. I mean,
Yeah, mold
You're-
cost,
I mean,
and
you're-
your bonds too.
yeah, you're talking 30-40% more in cost through the same block, 2-block section than I could do it all at once compared to breaking it out, so.
And if you're gonna put storm sewer in there, your curb is gonna be right on the edge of your road. Our pipe is 52 foot off the center line. So we're out of the public right away. We got a 40-foot easement past that,
Mhm.
so there'll be plenty of room for.
Doing the storm.
I just looked up the measurement, it's 52 foot from the center of the road. So
That's where your easement starts.
that's where my pipe is. Our easement starts
At the right.
33 feet additional.
Yeah,
Cause you start at the right of way line.
yes, we got a 40-foot easement from the right away, the 33-foot mark
To
to
the east.
the east, yep,
Right in the middle of your easement.
pretty close.
Yeah, cause you're about a foot to the west of the actual center of the easement, then if you're 52 foot.
While you guys are all chewing on that for a minute for the purposes of the recording, I feel like I need to explain where we're at, because when people watch this, I had an operator error and didn't hit record at the beginning of the meeting, and so the pieces that were missed were that the detention pond plan was approved with, the suggested changes. And so then that went ahead and passed, and then we engaged in the conversation about the sidewalk resolution, which is also going to be available on the website, so it's very easy to review. John was just giving us the highlights of what the sidewalk resolution included, and then this discussion is how do we go about this and taking into consideration all the different factors when we're talking about the paving of Fifth Street, how to handle curb and gutter, how to handle sidewalks, how to handle infrastructure issues, and then we finally started the recording, so apologies for that.
There's one more thing though on that curb and gutter and sidewalk and stuff with the assessments and stuff with the landowners and stuff. Like, just an example is one of the lots along Fifth Street with the backyard there has already been sold to somebody. So when your assessment stuff comes in, technically that's not Grant Park anymore. That's a separate lot.
That is correct.
So now, depending on how this falls into play on how that works out,
It would
because
be, yeah, it's assessed to the
it's
landowner.
assessed to the landowner, well, now that's not Granite Park, they bought a lot Now they're getting blindsided too with this, so it's,
Well, that's why you have the public hearing.
no,
though, and-
no, I was just making everybody
Yeah.
think about that aspect of it too, because the longer it takes, changes who pays for what, how it works.
Well,
And,
and this isn't, the whole resolution is not a thing of like, let's have
no,
Grant Park pay for it all. This is more
Right.
like, hey, guys, this is part of our responsibility and how are we gonna approach it? These are hard decisions. And it costs a lot of money to do these types of things. And I don't think citizens are very aware of the cost of infrastructure. It is a necessary expense of any city. And unfortunately, for bedroom communities of our size, we don't have masses of money to pay these infrastructure expenses. And so that's why, you have those bonds. That's why you have the loans. That's why the state and federal money is available. So that way veteran communities basically can afford these types of things. Then there's the option of assessing the landowners, depending on what's going on with that. And then, or any combination thereof. And that's what makes it super complicated. That's why I think it's a really great idea, Justin, if you can kind of bring us up to speed of curb, gutter, street, sidewalk 101.
Yeah.
So that way we learn as a city, because this isn't gonna be the last time we're gonna have to talk about this.
Right.
And, safe walkways to school is not as simple as everybody thinks it is. Slapping down a sidewalk is not as simple as everybody thinks it is. Whipping in some curb and gutter is never as simple as you think it is. And thank God we have the P and Z committee we have that has the professional experience that we can feel confident as a council, because they're the ones that are actually doing the work. So we have the right group of people at the right time to have this kind of a conversation. And we're really lucky to have these people volunteering their time.
Well, I want to say, thank God that a child has not been killed.
Definitely. And that goes for the north side of Lovely too. So I mean, we're not done yet.
Yeah.
This is kind of our practice, but mandatory. We've got to figure this out for lots of reasons. And then we're going to use this model as a guide as we move forward and try to figure some things out.
And the options for paying for these special assessments are italicized. They start on page 2 toward the bottom, way at the bottom, and
Here, I'll-
continue over on
Sure,
the top
I'll-
of page 3. So those are that's the statutory framework on how the options for payment are laid out.
So to revert back when you were explaining this to start with, is this required by state that we have to curb and gutter this road, or is this an option that we are given to by the state to enforce
Well, what a
this?
great question.
Because I'm just comparing this, and I'm sure everybody else, other people are too, on the other side of Lovely, how that road is strictly asphalt with no sidewalks anywhere. What's the difference between Fifth Street going south and Fifth Street going north? Why are we forcing curbs on here? Why shouldn't we be forcing curbs there?
Well,
Dodge that bullet before it.
great question.
That is a really good point.
If you look at section 91.18 of the ordinances of Baltic, which is entitled curb and gutter,
Which one is it? 91,
section 91.18.
91.9. Lacey and I are gonna try to get to that really quickly, is why I'm asking.
If you look at, section, oh, I'm sorry. Yes, the ordinance, correct, Lacey. No, that's fine, totally fine. Here it is. It does say shall install now. There's a little bit of a difference as to how sidewalks are treated under South Dakota law versus curb and gutter. There's a lot more attention given in the statutes to municipal sidewalks as opposed to curb and gutter. Why that is, I guess I'm not totally sure. For example, sidewalks are specifically allowed to be installed along highways, which is interesting. The statutes are they're basically silent on curb and gutter, and that's why we're focusing on the ordinance. Only residential and commercial construction shall shall install curb and gutter adjacent to the property where such construction occurs in conformity with the specs of the city engineer. The city council reserves the right to direct that curb and gutter be constructed and the cost assessed against any abutting property owner. Our ordinance requires it, but there's some interpretive, room, as you probably already figured out, adjacent to the property where such construction occurs. Well, I guess you could interpret that to mean along Lovely.
I mean, I'm not saying we gotta run around town and do curb and gutter everywhere. We're just having a starting point because we have, construction, obviously. Fifth Street has been a point of conversation since all of us took office. And, I just want to raise awareness of the process and the considerations that we have to, talk about to make an educated decision about how we want to handle this.
I think it's an easy opportunity to do it on Fifth Street right now, so
Yeah.
it's great.
Oh, absolutely.
That pavement,
Yeah.
so I think,
Definitely.
long range plan, if we start looking super holistically and trying to get the whole city done. That'll be another,
I think we do it in very, very small bites and we are thoughtful about it,
absolutely.
considering
Taking
grants, different
opportunities.
things like that. Yeah.
Speaking of big picture, Planning and Zoning Commission is charged with preparing a comprehensive plan for the city. So this
This is nice practice.
it's a nice segue right into the bigger picture.
Of where we go from here, and which way we go and look at which streets to implement it on to the start.
Great opportunity, and it needs to be seized.
But it starts with this, and I think at the public hearing, if we treat it as an education session, so people understand the process. I think it's really important, having these documents on the website so people can peruse through it and kind of try to wrap their hands around it as we do too, I think is important in the process. And, understanding that, this isn't necessarily a targeted event of anything, but rather the starting point of understanding this process, so that way we can continue to make sure that Baltic is growing in a safe and healthy walkability space. Because, obviously, we're all acutely aware of the need for sidewalks and safe walking to get our kids to school. So this is one way to do it. Is there any other discussion or questions about this?
If you're gonna discuss Fifth Street, might as well discuss Fifth Street all the way to Lovely. Curb and gutter, because if you're gonna have the crew working on that street,
Then if you're talking to Love, you just as well talk on the other side of Love. How far do you want to
I
take
mean,
it?
it's nonstop. I mean,
Well, and then maybe that's the phase. We do the phase down to Valley View, then we look at Valley View the nice thing, the very convenient thing right now is that there's a walking path going from Valley View to Lovely. So we
Yeah.
have a walking path there. So that's not necessarily an emergency situation per se. Fifth Street going north from Lovely could easily be considered a higher priority strip of land. Because those kids gotta walk right up on that hill and some cars, when they're turning, you can't see them. And there is no safe passage there. And so I think if, that's a great litmus test about what comes first, what comes second. And, from a walkability standpoint and a safety standpoint, when we met with the safety committee, all roads lead to the school. So, if we start with getting them to the school and branch ourselves out from there, and, our main artery is Lovely. So if we look at that, and, and already we have a walking path down one side of Lovely, with new construction coming, we'll have another walking path on the commercial side of Lovely, and so we just, that's the way to, it's one way to look at it.
And that's like when the phasing was mentioned.
Mhm.
So the phasing, instead of what everybody was thinking, was they put in curb and gutter and a storm sewer, and then they do this part, and they do this part on the same stretch. The phasing needs to be broke down to 2 blocks here. Pop across Lovely, get the 2 blocks there, do it in segments like that, complete from start to finish as a phase, instead of trying to phase the same 2 blocks into multiple phases. That's where you have to start, because obviously funds to do it. If you wanna go all the way from one end of town to the other end of town down Fifth Street, you're talking multi-millions of dollars. Well, you do 2 blocks at a time, that's how several smaller towns accomplish that as streets get vacated into the city limits, you know,
Mhm.
not vacated, that's not the right word.
Annexed,
Annexed, yeah,
incorporated.
incorporated into the city, and that's where we're coming from on Fifth Street to the north, is that was annexed into the city, and nobody ever looked at doing anything about it. Valley View, I don't know how or why that didn't get done, but that should have been done with the Valley View addition, hence where we're at with the Grant Park addition. As those developments go in, that should have been done.
Right, but then you could also argue the fact that, well, why would you take and spend, assuming millions of dollars long-term between what's not done yet from the intersection by the school all the way north on Fifth Street? Why spend the money to put curb and gutter in when your natural drainage works currently? When you don't have a problem with drainage the way it sits?
Mhm.
Why would you waste money spending that much
And you want
to not make things any better?
You wouldn't have to, you could do it to where it's just sidewalk.
Yeah, and that's the point of it too, is that's what you wanna do. I mean, sidewalks out.
So changing the drainage isn't necessarily always a good thing for a city either, because the street works, like you just said.
Mhm.
So the phase two might be, okay, because that's an existing deal, it's not paved yet, so, well, that's already paved, where south isn't paved yet, so if you're gonna pave the street, you wanna make it a full street.
Right.
At that time.
Right.
But because this street's already paved all the way to past David there,
Mhm.
David, right?
Yeah.
That there is where you would look at saying, okay, we don't need any infrastructure in that street, the drainage works. The sidewalk is put in,
Yep.
that's the phase, is to do the sidewalk work.
Wanna
And
make
then-
sure that
No,
that-
Travis, that is really
point
a
was
great
acknowledged.
point, and that's why we have to look at all of it.
Mm.
Because you're right, if it works, why fix it? That doesn't make sense. That's throwing money at nothing. That's really solid argument.
Because there's lots of streets even in Sioux Falls still that don't have curb and gutter.
I'm not curb and gutter in front of my house in a second.
No,
No problem.
that's what I'm saying, I mean, and there's streets to the west that don't have curb and gutter on quite a few of them, so.
Yep.
And it's not a necessity, it's just, if we're gonna pave a street that's not paved. that-
Yeah, there's no better time to do it than this, Chuck,
Then-
absolutely.
Then that's what that section's looking like. But just like Deb said, the street between Valley View and Lovely, when that development was done, would have been the time to do
Correct.
something with that, but now since it's already there, the better option, like you said, is to leave the drainage that's there and just get the safe paths.
Correct.
Mhm.
And then if the infrastructure has to be upgraded, that's when you would look at if the sewer, water infrastructure needs to be upgraded, that's when you would look at changing the ditches, the culverts, to curb and gutter, to asphalt.
So the case in point on Fifth Street, if we looked at the east side of that road, it may not be necessary to put, sewer and, culverts all the way through that, because you could put the sidewalk up and set back with the curb and gutter, and everything would just be fine, and it would be a comparatively minimal expense, but it would still get what we need, which is safe walking paths, but also,
And sidewalk,
handling the erosion
Yeah.
that happens on either side of that road.
and as far as sidewalks go, it's not always necessary to have them on both sides of the street. As long as you have safe crosswalks.
Yeah, the way that both those streets are designed, I mean, and I'm not an engineer by any stretch of the imagination, but plopping a sidewalk on the east side of Fifth Street, one end to the other is gonna be, I would assume, difficult to do, being that is a natural drainage way. You're not gonna plop sidewalk right on top of the ditch. There's not, like, there's 70 feet of room to work with. So then your other option is put on the other side of the street, that's no development whatsoever. So,
And that's what I was saying, I mean.
Yeah.
It's not necessary to have it on
Yeah,
both sides of the
no.
street when you're doing that type
Yeah.
of work, so it's. Have your crosswalks labeled, marked, so that it's safe.
Yep.
To cross, and then they can, just like what they did with that path along Fifth Street now, there's nothing on the east side. But there's crosswalks at both ends of it that are identified to cross the street.
So this is a really good sidewalk discussion, and it certainly won't be our last. But this was just kind of to dip our toe into in the water of what happens with sidewalks, what happens with curb and gutter, and just getting you guys thinking about it, because it is something we're going to have to consider. I guess the only thing to really decide is, do we want to move forward with the public hearing to widen this discussion and educate people about what we could do. Would that be the action item that would be next?
Well, that's a very interesting thought, independently of the resolution of necessity. Well, let me back up. How the statutes are structured is that the engineer puts together the details, the plans and specs. They get filed with Linda. Then what happens is the city adopts passes a resolution of necessity. And part of that is to set a hearing. But that's like when you're ready to go. When you've outlined a specific project that you want to undertake. Having a public hearing certainly could be done without, I mean, there's no reason why a public hearing couldn't be called on a draft resolution.
I mean, I don't even think it necessarily have to be a public hearing per se, more just an information.
Public comment.
Some, gathering or
Will people
forum or
come?
whatever you want to
See,
call
but
it.
the difficulty is that until you're gonna charge people money, they may stay home.
Right.
That's the problem. You know, and then, but once you do actually carve out a specific plan and figure out who's gonna pay for it, then you're gonna get the room full.
The other point of benefit is we're in November right now. It's not like
Yeah.
we're in March or April where we're chopping at the bit to get things done. So I think we have a little bit of time to make sure we do this right and get information out, so.
The only question that, and I think Ed has hit on that, is that to the extent there are Grant Park specific issues that we need to look at, we should move forward in demonstrating what that really looks like, Justin. Because, and that's gonna be kind of a segue into maybe the next item too.
So no action needs to be taken at this
No.
time, because this is purely informational.
Yeah.
Can I
Eh.
have a question?
Certainly.
Okay, so what about, I don't know how this works, but like if we would apply for like a bond or there's different options to pay for this, I think. I mean, is that something that could be looked into?
There's
too much
absolutely,
time, or
there's
is it too
absolutely.
early?
There's grants,
It's a little early yet for that. You gotta kind of have.
Yes.
Grant.
well, there's been
There's
walkability stuff though for sidewalks and things like that
Yes.
you can apply for every year.
Walking paths for the 10-foot wide trails. There's grants for that, but grants are very rare.
Applied for one every year for the last 3 years for sidewalks.
Mhm. The
I forget what
feedback,
it was called, but I know we have.
the feedback that I understand about that is there were two reasons why we were getting turned down for those grants. One was that.
The
we
first
had-
one was the entire city.
Right.
That's why we got turned down. But yeah.
Well, there is also the fact that we have intercity busing. And so then that disqualified us from some of those
Yeah.
financial sources, because since we provide intercity busing, they didn't consider this an emergency situation.
Mhm.
Another thing that Baltic, it's a wonderful problem, but our average income is higher than most.
Yeah.
And so that also disqualifies us from a lot of
Mhm.
grant applications, because apparently we collectively make too much money.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel that way, but that's how the state looks at it.
That happens a lot.
It
But-
does.
But not everybody is bused, right? I mean, there's just a certain age group. of
I'm
kids
just
that are
talking about
bused, I think.
specific grants that we've applied for and why we've been turned
Oh.
down.
But I think there is only a certain age. group
I think you're
that's-
right.
Everybody up till sixth grade can get bused.
Yeah.
Okay, up to 6. Okay,
Yeah.
see, that's what I
Up
thought.
to high school, junior high school,
Yeah.
so
'Cause they're
middle
not
school,
driving,
however you
so-
wanna call it.
So again, this all came about because of the request of paving Fifth Street, how to handle that, the fact that it was altered. And it was absolutely altered, and we're still trying to figure out how it happened. And then trying to resolve that issue. And also in the following item is trying to put a bow on our developers agreement, so that way we are all prepared to move forward. And so all of this kind of comes into play because that plot of land and having, making that kind of a decision does affect that, the development. And it also, we have all of the adjacent landowners wondering what we're gonna do with Fifth Street. So in response to that, in timing, that's where this resolution came from. We thought that this would be a great place to start. But then also just widen your vision and understand that this is kind of although it's the first place it seems reasonable to start for all of the things and all the reasons. It's not necessarily the last time we're ever gonna have this conversation. It's a great opportunity for us to learn. So that's why we're talking about this today, not because we want to nebulously talk about sidewalks. We want to talk about how we're going to approach Fifth Street specifically for all the reasons we need to address Fifth Street. So we're specifically talking about from the city limits south of town that we have now newly annexed, going to Valley View. That's the section that we're discussing. And the reason why we're bringing that up is because A, it's recently annexed, it's gravel. You know, there's been a lot of discussion and conversation with the previous administration of that getting paved. The adjacent landowners are asking for a solution because of the alteration of the street and the erosion control issues we're experiencing because of that alteration. So that's why we're here talking about this specific resolution. We could spend the next 6 hours talking about every sidewalk in town, but that's not what this was and why it was added to the agenda. So, with the time, Justin, with the timeliness of this and, the different things that we need to consider for it. When does it make, what would be the appropriate next step so we can let the adjacent landowners know that, yes, we're hearing you, yes, we're trying to move forward, yes, we're trying to get this done. What is the appropriate next step?
Well, a suggestion would be to isolate any portion of this project that should be folded into the Grant Park development agreement, if that makes sense. Is there a specified portion that makes sense to carve out?
Again, that gets really tough,
Yeah, okay.
you know?
Well, then that
So,
doesn't help.
yeah, I mean, if we want a successful project that all the residents are gonna look at every day,
Mhm.
you're gonna want to do it on the job.
Okay,
Right, but I think there are, you know, some opportunities if you're looking at a development agreement for cost sharing opportunities and such. Our project will get done and.
So what I'm hearing from you is that although this potentially, even though it's attached to the development, it is a separate transaction from the development. And for all the reasons you listed, we have ordinances to back that up. So we can take on this project when we see fit. Is what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
And there's no compelling reason otherwise. That's what I'm hearing.
That's exactly it, because everything in the regulations, so the subdivision regulations refers to a plot. This isn't the subdivision
Right,
ordinances here, this is actual ordinances that. So the subdivision ordinances can be more stringent than other ordinances,
Mhm.
but the other ordinances. The subdivision regulations have to be as stringent as the ordinances.
sure.
So the fact that the ordinance says that all adjacent land shall have that
yes.
is where it puts it to the fact that as soon as that development was done, it was supposed to be included.
Yeah, isn't that?
It is what it amounts to. The way the wording is, the way, I know somebody else at one of the city council meetings referred to the what oversees what in terms of precedents, you know, between the planning and zoning book, with information of the subdivision regulations and then just flat rate city ordinances. Well, it's kind of, city ordinances are at the top.
Mhm.
Everything below that's gotta be as strict, if not stricter.
So what I'm hearing you say, just for the purposes of clarity, the city ordinance says that there shall be. So it is for that reason, we might need to consider it in the development agreement or otherwise. Because then it would be an afterthought where we're like, oops, we missed something. Is that what I'm understanding?
Well, what's interesting is that the subdivision regulations were adopted by ordinance. Ordinance number 166. So the subdivision regulations are actually
In ordinance.
part of the ordinances. I do think that what you're identifying, Ed, is a correct statement of the generally applicable rules of interpretation, which are that the more specific controls over the general. Anytime there's a more specific rule, which there is with respect to curb and gutter. There absolutely is.
It perceived anything that was in the subdivision ordinance, because like you said, it's actually a ordinance of the
Yes,
ordinances.
yeah, it was published, clear back in 2000, but that's a very good. It's good to have this conversation.
It is. No, I mean, all of these. So what I'm hearing then is that even though the subdivision ordinances don't require it, the local ordinances do.
Here it is, and Ed, this is what you're operating off of. Article 2, legal provisions of the subdivision regulations on page 2, section 2, conflict. These regulations are not intended to interfere with or annul any other ordinance or regulation where any of these regulations are at variance with other rules, statutes, ordinances, or regulations. Those imposing higher standards shall prevail. So there you go. There
So
you
say that in English for everybody.
Gotta have curb and gutter. Even if the subdivision regulations don't address it, the ordinance over here says, you gotta have it.
Even though the plot abuts up to an existing city road and it's,
No, yeah.
It says that, that's what it says right here, though. Anytime you do the new construction, you shall put in the curb and gutter and sidewalk.
okay,
That's
so,
no different than, Mark Comrosson, where we made him give the city land, which it says also in the regulations that if the right of way is not the legal width, you have to basically
Okay.
forfeit that land, and he has to put curb and gutter and sidewalk in on his section of property.
and so
it's
let's use
same.
that as the example, because this is a great example then. If M&L Construction needs to put the curb and gutter in because it's new construction on the east side of Fourth, does that mean automatically on the west side of Fourth, they have to put curb and gutter?
No,
Hey, help me understand the difference.
so Justin can probably contend to this too, it's pre-existing,
Okay,
so it's grandfathered in. Okay, but if they tear something out and they put new in, then they have to meet all the ordinances.
There you go.
okay, so then let's do this again then. So if we take that same principle and we go over to Beth, because I'm sorry, I just want to make sure we're all really clear about this because we have to govern ourselves from ordinances and not nice to haves. I mean, there's the nice to have, which we all just talked about, like, let's sidewalk the whole city, but then there's the ordinances. In Fifth Street, because there's new construction, we now realize per ordinance, there has to be curb and gutter
Yep.
on the west side of the road.
East side.
East, yeah,
East side.
the east side of the road.
Now, this
As-
is the complication part.
Yeah.
The west side isn't new construction, it's existing, but the whole street was altered in the right of way, which makes the whole entire street new construction.
Okay,
So they'd all have to have curb and gutters.
So in theory, by the way this is worded, as soon as that whole street was touched, the homeowners, yes, can be assessed because that was a city street, but the person that did the work is the one that should have figured this out before they, that's the whole point of
Okay.
having the engineer.
so now I'm gonna go into a really, I'm gonna go into a precarious space then. From what you just said, the person that altered the road should have taken into consideration the laws and the ordinances that are governed in this city and prepared a plan that encompassed curb and gutter as well as all of the other basic engineering principles of street design when that road was constructed. Ideally in a perfect world,
Justin,
right?
that's
That's
exactly
that's
correct,
been
right?
discussed before too.
I don't think that's ideally. I think that's the law.
The law.
Okay,
It's actually
so,
state-
okay, so now that we're in that space, what happens when a road is altered without the governing body's
You
approval?
break it, you buy it.
Is that, I mean,
Sure.
that's a fun thing to say, but is that really
No,
what
it's real,
happens?
I'm not being glib, that's how it works, unless the city wants to eat it. See, all of these special assessments, the curb, the gutter, the sidewalk, the city can pay for that stuff. If you can afford it and if you want to, but you're setting precedents and you're also creating favoritism. And I think there's a core value of this group and that's why I'm here, frankly. I wouldn't be here otherwise, is that favoritism, it just isn't the way we do things here.
Right,
The same rules apply to the to everybody.
To everybody.
So do we have an ordinance or a law that dictates what happens to someone when they alter a municipal's road without the governing body's approval?
Well, I don't know that we have a case. I could research to see if there's a specific case that holds that, but it's a general legal principle that when a statute is violated and there's injury, that the liability that's created by the statutory violation is negligence per se, meaning the party's like running a stop sign. You run a stop sign, you're negligent unless there's some other offense. But I mean, to me, that's a legal proposition that almost doesn't need authority to cite to it.
Okay,
Because we previously identified the statute that was violated.
that was I mean, it's very clear the statute was violated, so I'm trying to figure out what to do with that.
Hard
If
for
we
me to-
now, if it now becomes a mandatory thing because of ordinances, so now we have to do it.
This goes into the development agreement in my mind. It gets folded into that once Justin can quantify cost, and that's what maybe I've been just nibbling around the edges too much.
And that's what I needed you to say, because what you're basically saying, and I'm just trying to make sure we're on the same page. What you're basically saying is because the street was altered by the developer's instruction, it is reasonable to ask the developer to take care of the street.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Because otherwise
And usually it just doesn't fall on the developer either, it falls on the person that did the work too.
There's,
Well, they have to have an insurance policy.
whoever the people are, the actors that did the actual work.
okay, then I apologize for using the word developer. It would be those who were
Responsible
involved with the
party.
alteration of the
It's
street
called joint and several liability. meaning
Okay.
It's individual and it's together
altogether.
collectively.
Okay,
And so I have no problem with that. And that's why the DANR issues and maybe I can give a plug to everybody. Please read the DANR warning letters and the reports, please.
yeah, and we'll get to that.
But see, we have sediment flows and stormwater flows and erosion and all that, which is exacerbating the problems with that street.
It's true, because we didn't have erosion issues on that street prior to the road being altered.
Right, and so.
And all of the
yes,
adjacent landowners on the west side of the street can attest to that.
We have to have linkage of the various issues and deficiencies because one affects the other. And so, and I sort of jumped to another topic, but we can't really address.
So let me just restate this. So what I'm hearing from you is this sidewalk resolution may need to be part of the developer agreement because of the ordinances that we're beholden to, and because we know an ordinance was violated in altering the street, that may be a condition of accepting
Well,
of our agreement. That it would be a condition that would make sense to be part of the development agreement because all of the pieces are intertwined. Is that
it's a bundle and you can't really
unbundle it?
unbundle it.
Okay. Well, I think it was important that we follow this path. Brian?
Yeah, so maybe John, you'd remember this, the Valley View Edition, was that in the developer agreement from, Dell's Lumber when they did the Valley View Edition?
I can't speak to that, Brian.
Frankly, I'm not even sure.
What year was that?
Yeah,
God, that
Two-
was like 20 years.
20 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it actually might have been a lot of these ordinances too, as far as that goes,
And we would,
or no?
I don't know if it's noted when our ordinances are passed in our library. I don't know. They just note it when it's edited, right?
Oh, fine.
Well, my house is.
Yeah, we should go when they're passed.
Okay. So Brian, another
So
thing that I'm
15
learning
years.
about municipal law.
It's been longer than 8, because that first house was there for quite a while.
Well,
before
Mellow
it
Gardens
was-
was the first house up there.
It was like 05. I came in 10. so I think it was, there was quite a few houses already there.
already there.
So I
The
think it
historian
started
has
at 5,
spoken.
Yeah, 04 or 5, I think it started.
So that would be 05. So Brian, another thing I'm learning though, is that in municipal law, precedence doesn't have the same levity that other laws have. And just because something wasn't followed once before, doesn't either mean we ignore it in the future. It's an ordinance needs to be followed.
Yeah, no, I was just curious as to how they addressed it back then, but.
Sure.
And I did email that statute that gives the city plenary authority to take actions to correct, abate, or prevent violations of city ordinances, state laws. SDCL 11-4-7 is, I think, what it is. And so if you know, it's kind of, maybe the analogy or the metaphor is worn now, but this group has a toolbox with plenty of tools in it. It's just a matter of doing all the hard work to become fully up to speed on what the issues are and then develop a plan.
Right.
Sure.
So at this point in time, it is of your opinion that we do consider this resolution as part of the developers agreement. Justin, after winding through that Kirby Country Road, are you of the same mind? Ed?
Yes.
So with that being said, do we need to have a public hearing? With this sidewalk resolution, or how do we handle it from here?
I think you need to wait until you've incorporated that developers agreement and see where you go from there.
I mean, that's a really great point, Nikki.
I mean, we don't know anything until that's been actually crafted and delivered. Do we?
Well, the difficulty is that until the erosion control and the sediment flows are addressed, I don't know how we do anything. And that's why all roads lead back, in my mind, to Justin's memo of today. Which, I mean, when you read that, and it's only 3 pages.
And for the point of reference, the memo was put on the website for people to see. So that is a public document that you can review, so the taxpayers have that accessible.
This is the original memo we're talking.
No,
It's a
no,
follow-up.
see, and and this is why I'm so glad you guys are having joint meetings, because this is gonna take a team, a group, and because it's way beyond even 2 or 3 people. Because basically, we're reverse engineering a development. That's really what we're doing. And after you read Justin's memo today, which is sent to Mr. Hefty's lawyers, you'll see exactly what we're dealing with on all of the critical issues that must be resolved. You have fiduciary duties by state law, the city of Baltic, and that's the highest duty that you can have in the law, is a fiduciary duty. So,
What John's saying is that if we don't address this and we don't ensure that there's a clean bill of health from the DANR, any damages or erosion issues that arise out of this after we accept the development now becomes on the hands of the taxpayers, and the taxpayers will be cleaning up anything that we didn't take care of.
will you become complicit? The
Yes.
city becomes complicit in a pattern of ignoring.
And so what he's saying is that we have to ensure that they have a clean bill of health from the DANR. Otherwise, we are obligating our taxpayers to handle those tasks.
And when you say the DNR, we need to also realize that the DNR also falls underneath federal jurisdiction, because the state DNR actually got in trouble for not making sure everybody was doing what they required from the federal government also. So it's not just the state that.
Ed, I'm so glad you say that, because I think it's really important that the taxpayers understand that what is going on right now is not something dictated by the city. It is something that's actually dictated by the state and federal requirements. And the city, the only leverage the city has to help ensure that these things are followed and that we're protecting our taxpayers is to halt the building permits until things are satisfied. That is our definitive leverage in this situation. And so this isn't the city putting the hammer down. This is the city making sure that everything is followed appropriately by our ordinances, state laws, federal laws, and just making sure things are done correctly. So that way our taxpayers don't become liable.
Yeah, Justin's memorandum on page 2 states that it is imperative that erosion control deficiencies are addressed prior to resuming construction. And there's a wonderful timeline there given from June 21 through October 26. And
again, Justin's done a great job of putting very complicated processes in very plain speak for those of us that don't look at this every day. And so thank you for taking the time to do that.
John and Deb can attest, there was a lot of conversations in between those states, so I try to just
There's a
pick
few.
out some
There's, okay.
of the highlights on there. You know,
Well, yeah.
Just try to make it nice and clear for you guys. Those are some timeline events. There's some.
Many things happening in between.
And that's not to mention that this is just from when we got the state here, not to mention all the months pre-June of 21 where things were not enforced, done, or kept up that got us to this point.
terrific learning curve, but I think we're getting ahead of this now. And it's the developer's responsibility to be in compliance with all DNR requirements. And they have a general permit for stormwaters. I mean, they're issued a permit. And one of the things that the warning letters point out is that even to this day, there is not a competent person that is capable of managing the erosion control and stormwater requirements. I mean, just read the warning letters. That's what I say to everybody. Just read them. It won't take you too long to read them, and you'll see what the challenges are. And you are being required basically to enforce compliance.
And also remember that it's our responsibility to do it. We can't have knowledge of this and then just look away. It is our responsibility, to the city that we make sure that we address these things.
Yeah.
And so, it's kind of out of our hands at this moment because we're obligated to see this through. Sure,
Why isn't the state stepping in and saying?
they are.
Well, they are, and you can read the warning letters. I mean,
Oh, I read the letters.
they're threatening enforcement action, but they're short-staffed.
Yeah, that just like with everybody, the import staff, so I know those guys are working very, very hard for the group they got. Trying to tackle as many issues as possible, so that's where, some of the on dinner comes from, and no fault to them, they
And
do the best to cover the whole state.
But I think this is an appropriate time to say if the developer would be compliant with the rules that are set before them, then none of us would be dealing with this. And I will say the city has spent an inordinate amount of time and tax dollars on labor and on fees and on hours that we've invested on experts on our end that really should have been handled on the developer side, but now the taxpayers have to pay that bill because the developers have chosen to turn a blind eye to very, very clear and concrete black and white rules. And so on the whether or not, we're still paying for it right now.
Yeah.
There's a lot of studies that Justin has developed and had to vet that should have been done by the developer's engineer, and they should have just produced it and given it to us, and that's not what happened. Justin had to create those. And so we're spending a lot of time this is not the normal transaction of a development at all. This is not the normal path, and it's unfortunate.
And when you ask that about why ain't they doing that, or why aren't they stepping in more? A prime example is we're not Sioux Falls, we're small compared to Sioux Falls. Sioux Falls, all permits in Sioux Falls are still issued by the state. Sioux Falls does 100% enforcement of all. The reasoning why is because it's too big, the state don't have enough people to handle that. So when the state was here, I actually asked that question when we did the walkthrough inspection, and they said that the city is also supposed to help out and enforce what they say in a roundabout way.
And I think this is a really great time to explain your conversation you had with the city of Sioux Falls and how they handle erosion control issues and building permits.
They do the same thing we're doing right now. You don't hear about it because they're huge.
Sure.
So an example is Sioux Falls, there's an apartment complex being built. They broke, damaged, destroyed a curb and gutter along a public street. Winter's coming. Sioux Falls has a list of requirements that are required by everybody to follow before winter hits. They weren't fixing the curb. They suspended all building until it was fixed. They pulled their building permit so that they stopped work until it was done because they weren't complying. So it's no different than what we're doing. It's just, we're a small community, so
It looks like it's a bigger deal because we have, we have very few developments and one is getting stopped for very real reasons. And it is absolutely the process that should be followed.
You're not pulling building permits, you're just suspended giving new ones.
Right.
so
So that's a big difference in pulling.
Yeah,
it
yeah.
is, it is. And we do have that authority though, if you read the 1147.
Don't want to.
But we chose not to.
We chose not
We
to do
chose not
that
to.
part, so.
And so again, all of this could be rectified very quickly if the developer was meeting compliance. I mean, it's pretty clear what's expected. And so we're just really hopeful that the developer, meets that and we get that clean bill of health and we can all move forward. Also the development agreement, when John says, because we're on the development agreement part, when John says like re-engineering a development, that's absolutely what happens because a development agreement is a fundamental part of any development. And so what John is doing is he's reviewing the Sioux Falls Development Agreement, which is again, standard operating procedure for annexations and developments to see what we should have as a standard development agreement going forward. So we have this tool for us. So that way, not only are we learning from this, but we're also avoiding this from happening in the future and any leadership that follows after us.
It's a growing curve.
Yeah,
I mean,
it is.
T, Harrisburg, granted, we're not nearly as large as them, but they all went through the same thing. Even Garrison has issues, with the same thing, it's not just us that's seeing it, it's just we're following through prior to getting to where our town's bigger, and then it's hidden more, so.
Makes sense.
So doing the right things for the right reasons. That's what's going on here. So,
State would step in more and say,
oh, they're definitely doing their part.
They're
doing
doing
their
their part, and the city, could overlook that and say the state's taking care of it, we're just gonna keep letting them build. Well, as a city with the damage and everything else that's occurring, that's why we made the decision to stop it now until it's fixed, so that it doesn't get more out of control before the state, everything else gets done, if that makes any sense.
And to state that really clearly, there's about 600 rooftops in the city of Baltic. And I believe that I can speak for everybody when I say we don't believe that it's the fiscal or the financial responsibility of the 600 rooftops that we have in Baltic to pay for that damage and those expenses. That should be on the entity that caused it, regardless of who it is. And that's what we're trying to get to. We're trying to get that regardless of who it is. I think that this group of people will always stand that the responsible party should have the responsibility to take care of that. And it's our job to protect our taxpayers and our families in Baltic from having to pay more than they should have to when somebody else is breaking the law. That's what's happening. Okay. So back to sidewalk resolution. Do we need to have a next step in light of the fact that we realize now, A, it's required, and B, a street was altered? So we need to address this.
I thought you were gonna include that in the development.
Yeah, it's gonna have to go in the development.
Thank you. We talked about a lot of stuff. Okay, so that's going in the development agreement. So now on development agreement, as far as where we're at with that, that is still a work in process. We're using Justin's memo as a guide within that. John is still double checking different sources, making sure that we have everything that we need.
Right, it's, Justin's memo is a critical part because really, the development agreement will have basically the core items that Justin has identified. We'll put them in. We'll need to establish timeframes for completion.
Mhm.
We need to have provisions for the acceptance of public improvements that the developer is constructing at its expense. We need to have a warranty period. And I would like to have some type of security built in. Possibly a personal guarantee or some type of financing. We'll figure it out, bonding.
Sure.
And the developer has resources to check on this stuff too, so.
And again, this is an agreement that should have been established at the beginning of development, not at the end. I mean, this is
Correct.
not an ideal timing,
Right.
but nonetheless, it needs to happen.
But the difficulty is that I don't know that based on how the developer has proceeded, that a development agreement would have prevented all the erosion and the lack of
Sure.
control. I mean, and this is the difficulty I have with presenting an agreement, is that you need to have confidence that the developer will actually comply with the terms of the agreement, and we need timeframes.
And that's where the assurances come in.
Absolutely, and that's been the challenge all along, is getting timeframes. And we need those, and when we get into a resolution of necessity for sidewalks, we've got to have those timeframes established,
Mhm.
because the state law requires them.
Well, I see here where they, Justin had put in his letter that they had timeframes that they were supposed to meet, respond and stuff. Have they done any of that?
Yes, they did respond,
To some of it.
on some of it by the extension date. Like here said that they responded by the 31st of August. They had an extension from September 1st to, or on September. They had an extension because originally it was supposed to be done by August 15th.
This was required by August 22nd.
Yeah.
And the extension was granted to September 1st.
Well, and we're,
One thing I would note too, they're responding to it, but you can see by the ongoing process of stuff still not being up to snuff, that although they responded, it may not have been taken care of as the DNR would have.
if you'd like to read their responses, I'd be.
That's just what I was. I can read the point when you say that we should put timelines and stuff.
And they're.
That's twice you've read that big book, twice.
Right.
That's blood on it.
Good questions, though, Deb.
Well, there you go, Deb. I mean, that's the concern we have, and this group's gonna have to decide how to approach that issue. So,
None of this is easy and none of this is this is not the path that any of us want, right? I
The
mean,
fact that even the previous administration wanted.
Absolutely.
Wanted this to be as smooth as possible. Obviously, the more trained eyes to get on this, the
I've got a lot of other things I'd like.
and I think that's important to say. I really don't believe on any level that the previous administration knowingly or willingly engaged in this situation and expected this process.
it
And so I want that to be very clear.
it was not negligent. It was not just trying to blow this thing through to get it going. It was either a lack of information provided. Obviously, we're not all
Lack
professionals.
of knowledge.
Yeah, we're not all professionals in the construction industry, so it's an unfortunate way to learn this the hard way, but yeah, I make sure that it's known that nobody, regardless of who you are, is gonna want a development to go this way.
Agreed. No, and I think that's important. And actually, there's a lot of information, not a lot. There is some information that we have found that absolutely corroborates what Travis said. Because we're still trying to find, where, there's a lot of points in there, where, Banner said there would be 2 representatives. We can't find who the second representative was reviewing the plans. We're still trying to find the preliminary plans where that is. We're trying to find the meetings where, things were discussed. We're trying to figure out where the emails were, where they were approved. There's a lot of information that we're missing. It's kind of a Swiss cheese experience, in light of the condition that we came into City Hall. And so we're doing the best we can, but what I will say is we have found pieces of information that absolutely back Travis up in what he said. That I do believe the previous information, or the previous administration did not have all the information and the appropriate professional guidance that that group needed to confidently move into this development and take on this kind of a project with confidence and guidance to do right by the taxpayers. So they did the best they could with what they had.
We don't know what we don't know.
Exactly. However, here we are. And now it's this administration that with the expertise that we have, with the knowledge we have, with the guidance that we have, to be able to do things correctly, so our taxpayers are not going to foot the burden of what has come before us. So we didn't make this situation, but we're going to fix the situation. Doing the right things for the right reasons. I'm really glad that you brought that up. Okay. Developer agreement in process at this time. Once we have it ready, we'll bring it to the group again.
This group's gonna have to decide how to approach the joint motion that was approved at the last special meeting.
That one's in process.
Oh,
The developer is aware of the joint motion. He's aware of the originating letter and he's aware of what we expect to come out of it. He's also aware that that is one of the points to get to a final resolution. So I think that one's in play. I think that one's okay. John and I had a conversation today. I think it's appropriate to bring it up now that John felt that maybe it would take a bit of a team to hash through these items to make sure that we have everything covered, and it would be extend beyond Justin, John, myself, and Ed that are doing the lion's share of this stuff. So I don't know how many people make sense. I don't know who that should be. I don't know if it should be citizens, if it should be elected officials, if it should be P and Z members. I'm not, so what John suggested is we need a group of people to actually look at this and dig through the volumes of things to make sure we have everything covered, so we're not missing anything. Am I getting that right, John?
yes,
And
Yeah.
it'll take a little bit of elbow grease. We've done a lot so far, but there's still some things like tonight, we've just experienced how long have we talked about this because we're doing it together as a group. It might be more productive if we have a breakout group that's tasked with this and then come back with their findings to make sure that we're confident with the development agreement. So we all know if there's more, if the group's too big, it's too hard to find a time to get together. But I do think that Justin needs to be a part of that. John needs to be a part of that. And Ed, I hate to volunteer you to do something, but I really think that you need to be a part of that. Yeah, I think you were just voluntold. And
Yeah, I've been told that too.
I guess the next question, is there anyone else that has the bandwidth that wants to participate in that group to get us to where we need to do for the agreement from the elected and appointed body?
Are you voluntold telling me?
I think you're getting a stern look from John.
Yeah, I'm getting voluntold. Yeah, I can, yeah, sure.
Okay, so Ryan Cindy's gonna be part of that. Is there anyone else that wants to be a part of that? With the silence, I'm wondering, the next question is, are there citizens we want to ask to be a part of this? Or I'm just throwing it out there because it's their bill to pay, you know?
Deb, would it make sense to have one of our local contractors on something like that?
It might be a potential conflict of interest, having that.
Okay.
That's my initial thought, Brian, and obviously I don't have the hard line say on
I
this
don't
one.
know which one would wanna do that if they're businesses with the development.
Yeah, I think that's
and
a conflict
that's
of
not
interest.
Somebody that,
I mean, great idea though, Brian, because what you're thinking is you're thinking expertise, right? Knowledgeable eyes looking at stuff. Yeah.
Correct.
Totally get your train of thought. Linda, is there
I'm very confused.
sure.
What do you want?
We're thinking about having a group of people to vet do the due diligence on the development agreement. So that way we can
Like a
be assured it's ready to go.
yeah, a working committee, just like a subcommittee, only a committee.
A lean event.
That focuses solely on the development agreement so we can get it done.
To bring
But
recommendations.
unless you're an attorney or an engineer, can you bring to the table?
These two guys.
Well, yeah, definitely.
and that's where you're gonna have a hard time, like I said, with finding somebody that's not on the body, that's a
Yeah.
citizen. that I don't know who would wanna honestly just volunteer to put themselves in.
I'm just
At this point.
widening the net is all I'm doing, because I believe that if somebody really wants to get their hands dirty on this and help us out, it's worth considering, I guess is what I'm saying.
Well, you can leave it that way, and if they choose, if there's somebody that really is interested, they can certainly call us or you or
City
City
Hall.
Hall.
Linda, you-
Deb, I do have a contract analyst that I know that is, has said that, that she would be willing to look at helping as well. If you might have a message on your phone.
Oh, okay. So let's leave it at that, and then I appoint the working committee kind of a thing. Is that how we want to do
Yeah,
that?
you could have a motion that gives the mayor you probably have the authority anyway, but it might be nice to have a motion that provides for you to appoint.
Up to
committee.
2 more people.
Mhm.
So we
Sure.
have Justin, we have John, we have Ed, we have Ryan, and then the ability to have 2 more people
I
on
don't
that
think
committee.
you wanna get much more than.
That's why I'm saying I don't.
You get too many people,
Even
then
one
you.
more.
I was gonna say 1 more might actually be it.
Yeah,
That makes sense.
You don't want to do the number.
Do you need a secretary?
but you'll have, I view myself and Justin as advisors to the group, and we'll be reporting up with information.
I volunteer. I'll volunteer to be the secretary. Take the notes.
Take notes, okay.
It's like a real deal.
Little team. Okay, so do we have a motion to create a working
Mhm.
committee?
I make a motion to create a working committee for the developers agreement,
Be appointed by the
to
mayor.
be appointed to the mayor.
And so, do we have a first, do we have a second?
I can second that.
Nikki will second it. Linda, did you get that? And then, so we have a second, all say aye. Any opposed? Okay, so we're gonna have a working committee. We have 4 people already on it with the ability to appoint 1 more person
By you.
by me. Okay, so that's what we'll do. And, so be watching for information. And we'll get that started. Linda, you'll be the city hall point person on that. Ryan, attend when you can. Okay, at your discretion, please. Not you, Brian. I said Brian Fod.
I was reading his face.
I got other tasks for you. You're gonna get voluntold soon. Just wait.
I got a question before you adjourn P and Z.
Sure.
With regard to the detention pond, since it was a joint motion to pass between P and Z and city council, that's just moving forward from here, right?
Yep.
Yeah,
I think,
I just wanted to
didn't P
clarify.
and Z were the only ones that voted though, right?
Oh, I thought everybody did.
Well, that's because you're on both, so.
Just P and Z.
Just P and Z voted.
All right.
on that. So
You didn't hear
P&Z
how
has
quiet
to do
Nikki
it
was?
before.
Nikki's never quiet.
Okay.
Okay, so, I'll get back to you, Linda. I'll tell you who the committee members are, and then they can report those results. And then we'll get this moving so we can get on it, okay? Is there any other items that we need to approve other than the minutes I see of the joint meeting that we didn't approve from last time? So we missed that. So has anybody reviewed the minutes of the joint session? Do we have a motion to approve on the joint session? Since we all kind of have
Yeah, I
to.
did. I didn't see any issues with it. Pretty
And you're.
Pretty cut and dry and what's that?
Well, I suppose, I mean, Travis makes a good point because it wasn't up top. We should have amended the agenda, but we really can't amend the agenda because of open meeting law. So the council can approve it, but it's gonna have to go back to P and Z to approve their portion, to have it fully vetted. So we'll just leave that in city council, because it's not under P and Z.
We can prove it at their next meeting.
Take care of it
Make sure
then.
it's on the-
No, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Lacey, want to make sure that's on the P and Z?
I needed time.
Perfect. Thanks for keeping us in line.
I make a motion to adjourn the P and Z board.
I will second.
Oh, we got
All
first
those
and
in
second.
favor?
Aye.
You're like, I want to get out of here.
Aye.
Fine.
Yeah.
Nice evening.
Well, the door hits you, hanging up, like.
1-5.
Yeah.
I'm gonna stop the recording and start again with just the city council, so, anyone watching, you don't, this doesn't affect you, but I'm just going to, do that for the purposes of the recording.